Hello, I'm Tony Wickenden and I'm joined by Claire Trott, and we're going to have a look at the budget proposals and the implications for investors, for retirement planners and business owners. Now, the background to the government's first budget was one of economic uncertainty, not helped by further economic uncertainty loaded upon us by the coronavirus. The government were also very mindful of fulfilling the many promises they made in their manifesto. And they were hemmed in a little by the freeze on increases to income tax, VAT and national insurance. No surprise then that the Chancellor spent a large part of the speech talking about his reaction and the help that he's going to provide to institutions, that's businesses, individuals and public services, notably the National Health Service, to help them overcome the challenges of the coronavirus, the economic challenges that is, of course, to look at infrastructure spending. But our job here is to look at the fiscal proposals such as they were. So as I mentioned, we're going to look at investors, the implications for retirement planners and business owners. So starting with investors. Not very much to consider here. The two main changes I'd like to talk about are first the change to the capital gains tax annual allowance. Now that change just moves the annual allowance up from 12,000 to 12,300 for the next year. So what does that mean to individuals? It's available to every individual, so for couples and people who have children, remember that's available to all of those people, and transfers of assets unconditionally may be worth considering. The main thing with the CGT allowance is that it goes. If you don't use it in a year, you lose it. So think about the use of that allowance as we move towards the end of the tax year. The other change, very relevant for parents, is the significant increase proposed to the contribution level for junior ISAs, the JISA. That's going up to £9,000 from around £4,500 currently, 4,368 to be precise. So that's quite a big move up, and something that parents should definitely take note of if they're looking at funding for the costs of higher education, getting on the property ladder, etc. for their children. So there was a lot of talk ahead of the budget, wasn't there, about retirement planning and what changes there might be. So what actually emerged?
Yes, there was a lot of talk about what could be done. Lots of things proposed in the press about the possibility of changing all the tax reliefs. But actually what we saw was fairly minor changes to legislation. But what we've seen for those high earners, the increase in the tapered annual allowance thresholds, they've all gone up by £90,000, which is significant, bringing a lot of people out of the taper. However, it's also extended the top end of the taper. So previously the minimum you would have was 10,000, but for earners over 300,000, it can now taper down to as low as 4. So people need to be careful to double check what they're actually contributing, and maybe get in contact should they be concerned they might be contributing too much, or if they're looking to increase their contributions, now's a good time to review that and actually look to see what they can do.
It's a really good point that clients should get in touch with their partners to discuss any aspects of those pension changes they feel could be relevant to them. And it's the same with investments. There's a lot of tax efficiencies you can achieve by knowing how to make the most use of the tax allowances that are available to you. Another good reason to call your partner. In relation to business owners, connected to pensions, the business owners, a couple of changes really that are relevant to them. One that was well trailed, one that we already knew about. One, the corporation tax rate is remaining at 19% rather than 17%. It still remains a very low rate, and people will of course continue to trade through companies where it's right for them. The big change though that was trailed quite heavily was the change to entrepreneurs relief. Some expected it to be actually abolished, but it hasn't been. For transactions that took place from budget day, so that would have been midnight the night before, the lifetime allowance, the overall allowance for entrepreneurs relief has dropped from £10 million to £1 million. Otherwise, everything remains the same. There are some provisions that will catch some forms of planning that took place ahead of the 11th of March, but most ordinary commercial transactions wouldn't. So that's quite a big change for entrepreneurs relief. Not much we can do about it, it's just a fact, and it's the way it is now. So to close on this, having considered investors, retirement planners and business owners, it's important to remember that this is the first of two budgets, and while we haven't had that much in the way of fiscal change that affects the financial planning process, we could well expect some more change in the autumn budget. There's been a lot of talk around the inheritance tax change, and of course those possible wider pension changes that you mentioned, Claire. As we approach the end of the tax year, the one thing I'm sure we will both encourage clients to do is to take some time, contact their partner, maybe even run a tax health check to make sure that they're making the use of their allowances before it's too late.